let's go over some structures on the ventral view of the brain. Let's start up here in the more rostral or anterior portion of the brain. Remember that this is the underside of the brain, if that kind of helps you with orientation. We have it like so, and then I've flipped it up like that. So here we have the olfactory bulbs. The bulbs are going to be the little parts that look like light bulbs. And then they will connect to these passageways called olfactory tracts. So every time you see that word tract, think of a passageway like so. And we'll see that quite a bit. So that was cranial nerve 1. So let's look at cranial nerves, I should say 2, because we have a left and a right. This model's nice, by the way, because we have the Roman numerals that show that. If you don't have an image or a model that's labeled, find an example like the one I'm using that is labeled and then just transfer that information over. To me, that's the easiest way to do it, especially if you have to know those Roman numerals. Okay, here, cranial nerves number 2, or Roman numeral 2 will be right here. And those are the optic nerves. We're only seeing a portion of them. Remember, in actuality, these will continue and connect to each eye. So these are cut off right here, and they will come together to form, you see how we kind of have this little X-like structure? That is called the optic chiasm. And we will see that word chiasm multiple times in A&P. A chiasm represents a place where we will have crossing over or decussation. And when we get into the senses chapter, we're going to see that some images, some visual images will come through the optic nerves and they will decuss or cross over to the opposite side of the brain. We see that crossing over frequently in the brain anyways, but as far as vision goes, this is where that crossing over happens at the optic chiasms. That was cranial nerve number 2, the optic nerve. So let's move on to cranial nerve number 3, and I've zoomed in because I think it makes it a little bit easier to see. The cranial nerve 3 represents the oculomotor nerves, and those are going to innervate the rectus muscles of the eye. And for my students, we'll look at that next week. Those are the muscles that actually control eye movement. And then also, this will innervate a sphincter muscle that helps control the diameter size of the pupil, as well as the ciliary muscles. Again, we're going to see these terms next week, but those ciliary muscles help control the shape or the roundedness of the lens. So those are going to be right here. And my biggest tip for cranial nerve 3 of the oculomotor nerves is that, recall that this is the pons, that large bridge that we've already looked at, and the oculomotor nerves are going to be just superior to that. They'll be real close to that. Next, cranial nerve 4, that's this little one right here. That's called the trochlear nerve, and just real quickly, that actually connects to the superior oblique rectus muscle of the eye. That will make a lot more sense next week when we're looking at the eye in more detail. Cranial nerve 5 is the trigeminal nerve right here. Think tri 3, and it actually branches off into 3 divisions on the face, which is why we call that the trigeminal nerve. We have the ophthalmic branch, the maxillary, and the mandibular. And it's a mixed nerve, so it has sensory and motor functions. But that is right here. Kind of think kind of the upper portion of the pons is what I would say. But just remember, 3 branches for the trigeminal nerve. Then we have cranial nerves number 6. And these are referred to as the abducens nerve, and they will both connect to one eye or the other, and specifically to the lateral rectus muscle of each eye. So just lateral to cranial nerve number 6, we find cranial nerves 7 and 8. This model looks a little bit different than how you'll see it drawn. In most illustrations, you'll see 7 and 8 kind of grouped together as a little trio of nerves right here. This model shows it again a little bit differently, so I'll try to explain best I can with what you see here and what you're looking at either in a lab manual or a textbook image. But of the little group of 3 that you see, cranial nerve 7 is going to make up the 2 medial nerve bundles, and that is going to be called the facial nerve, and that will go to areas of the face that help control expression, helps us with taste, and then it even goes to another term we'll see next week, the lacrimal gland of the eye. So that is cranial nerve number 7. And then cranial nerve number 8, which in most illustrations, when you kind of see a little trio like this, cranial number 7 would be these 2. And then if this is the left side of the brain, so like this, again, cranial nerve number 7 would kind of be these 2, and cranial nerve 8 would be this one over here. But cranial nerve number 8, especially for my students, that is the vestibulocochlear nerve, and we are going to look at that next week as well when we talk about hearing, because this nerve is what helps us interpret sensory information that allows us to hear. I've zoomed in again so that we can focus on the medulla oblongata right here. And I'd like to talk about cranial nerves 9, 10, 11, and 12. Let's look at cranial nerve number 9 first. In this area, we have 2 groups of nerves, and one is more anterior or rostral, and the other one is more posterior or caudal. So the one that is more rostral, that's number 9, and that's called the glossopharyngeal nerve, and that is involved in taste. And then also in AP2, when we talk about the digestive system, this is what helps increase salivation from the parotid gland. So for my students who are going to go on to AP2, you're actually going to study that gland next semester. And then here we have cranial nerve number 10. Of the 2, this is going to be the bottom one if you're just looking on this view. But this is a really cool one. This is referred to as the wandering nerve. And it's neat because it leaves this part of the brain and then it's going to go to a lot of different parts of the body. So it will go to portions of the pharynx, the larynx, the heart, lungs, a lot of abdominopelvic organs. And so it just kind of goes all over the place, and there's some really cool research that is happening with the vagus nerve, what it connects to and what it controls. So this is one that if you read medical literature, you'll probably end up reading a lot about that one right there. And then quickly right here we have cranial nerve number 11. This is called the accessory nerve, and that will innervate the trapezius and the sternocleidomastoid. And then here cranial nerve number 12. It's the one that's maybe most midline on the medulla oblongata, if you want to think of it like that. That one is called the hypoglossal nerve, and that will help control our tongues. If you have to know the order of the cranial nerves, remember that these Roman numerals go in order. They generally go from anterior to posterior, so that's one way that you could order them. A lot of students like to make mnemonics. One mnemonic that I have seen frequently is, oh, once one takes the anatomy final, very good vacations are heavenly. But there are many others. I'm sure you could ask others what their mnemonics are, see what works best for you. So I hope those tips help you. Let me know in the comments what you think about this, and I'll see you next time.